given the fact that they were able to pinpoint exactly where they were standing or sitting at the time of this meeting, and intelligence sources saying that they were able to see them go in. They're told Saddam, and I'm hearing one source told me both sons. One source told me that that both sons may have been there. We're hearing conflicting information as to whether both sons were there, because a lot of people in the intelligence community believe that Qusay, one of his dearest sons, really the one who was the closest to him, may have been killed on that first strike of the war. Remember, we were targeting Saddam Hussein, but I'm getting some mixed information as to whether both sons were at this meeting tonight or just one. But everyone seems to believe very strongly that Saddam Hussein himself was at this particular meeting. Also, some very other interesting details, Greta, that, and this is fascinating, just to give you an idea of the sophisticated technology that the U.S. has. This is astounding. Apparently, during the Iran-Iraq war, the Brits sold something called the Jaguar, which is a voice encryption or encryptive service, which actually uses cell phone technology, and it's based on very highly hidden secretive formulas calling hops, a certain amount of hops per minute. And apparently this particular Jaguar system was sold to Saddam Hussein, a couple of his sons, and just a few members of his inner circle. And the U.S. has been able to monitor this Jaguar because, of course, the Brits have been, heavily helping the U.S. in this effort going into Iraq. Was able to give them the information so they could break the code on this Jaguar system. And so essentially the U.S. has been able to track down Saddam Hussein almost since this war began. And what the distinction is, because remember, he has a number of doubles. In fact, I'm told maybe up to 7 doubles. The doubles do not use this service. So the U.S. getting a read on where this service was located, being able to break the code, in other words, being able to break some of the conversations he was actually having, they've been able to monitor him pretty successfully and know whether it was a double or Saddam Hussein. And that's why they strongly believe that it was Saddam Hussein, because they got a read on this Jaguar tonight, that he was actually in that building with at least one of his sons and also Iraqi leadership. Also, interestingly, I am told that they have actually gone out to the site. A number of our special operation forces have been out to the site. They describe it as an enormous hole to me, describing it as at least 40 to 50 meters wide and many meters deep. This residence, just to give you some ideas too, is a residence in Baghdad, and I'm told that there was a bunker or some sort of emplacement underneath the residence. They're not quite clear. It doesn't look like they were in the bunker area when the bomb hit, but that gives you an idea why they went to the lengths of dropping these 4 bunker buster bombs, because they knew that this was a facility that had an underneath emplacement, possibly a bunker, and that they could actually go into that location. But they believe, at least the read that they got just a few moments before, that they were in the actual house on the upper level of the house, the main level, not the bunker below, at least a few moments before, and that because they had these special ops forces, because they were able to read this Jaguar, this sort of encryption service that Saddam Hussein was using to communicate, even as recently as just right before the strike, he had stopped a number of levels of communication. And in fact, I was told that he was using a lot of cab drivers, using a lot of verbal communication, but he was still using this Jaguar system, thinking that it could not be encrypted, because when the Brits sold it to the Iraqis during the Iran-Iraq war, they said it's almost impossible. And it seems that the Iraqis did not believe that the Brits would pass on this information to the U.S. And the U.S., it took a lot of work, but they were able to actually decipher and break the code and determine some movements of Saddam, some of the things he was actually saying. Also, my intelligence sources are also telling me tonight that we were close to Saddam Hussein at least 3 or 4 other times in the last few weeks, and that to the point where they thought they may have missed him by a few minutes at a number of these leadership target strikes that we've been doing in the last few weeks. But they were actually very close to him, and now it makes sense, based on this information from the Jaguar, that they had a pretty good read on him where he was. And again, saying tonight, Greta, essentially that they strongly believe he's dead. It could be some time till we get a clear confirmation, because based on the physical damage and talking to someone who actually spoke to someone on the ground there, they said it is an enormous hole, that this house is no longer existent. So it could be some time until we can actually get a positive identification, if ever.
All right, Rita, if you can get us some more information, we're going to go right to the Pentagon. Bret Baier staying by. He's got some new information. Bret?
Hi, Greta. Just talking a little bit more about what Rita was talking about, the crater there. Talked to one official who said, Bret, quote, we're talking dust, what was left. The strike tonight was taken with a B-1 bomber. It was used as a target of opportunity. As we've been mentioning, 4 bunker buster bombs were used, dropped from this B-1, precision-guided bombs, JDAMs, Joint Direct Attack Munitions, but the bunker buster variety, which means that they can delve deep into a building, get under where these bunkers are, and essentially explode down after they have penetrated through the earth to the lowest point. Rita mentioned that this particular building had an underground facility, and it was not clear, according to U.S. officials, whether the meeting was happening in the lowest level. But we can tell you that the crater that is left, according to U.S. officials, numerous sources, is extensive tonight. Again, we're talking dust, according to one defense official here. As we mentioned, that they have been operating under this urban combat air support system, where they have a number of fighter jets in the air over Baghdad 24/7. This particular bombing run was specific, based on time-sensitive intelligence, as we have been talking about, that this meeting was ongoing and that people on the ground firmly believe that Saddam Hussein and at least one of his sons were inside this building at the time it was taken out, and that's when they called in the B-1. Don't know the lag time between the time they had the intelligence and the time the strike actually took place, but we can tell you that people are on the ground now looking at that facility, U.S. troops and other U.S. personnel.
And of course, I just want to bring the viewers up to date that what they are seeing on the other side of the screen, Brett, is earlier tape of what we believe was the bombing that occurred tonight, in which the
Iraqis, middle-class Baghdadis, who consistently expressed the fear that all the people on the outskirts of the city who had been oppressed for so many years, and we're talking about neighborhoods of Shias who had moved there in waves, Shia Muslims, moved in waves from the south, originally to find work in the city. They're now spread around the city in huge communities that had been self-contained. Saddam City, for instance, which had up to 1 million Shias in it, was always thought to be so potentially subversive that it was almost always under virtual military control. There are a lot of fears in the center of Baghdad that if things are unleashed, that if there is a period where there is a power vacuum in Baghdad, that the walls could break open, if you will, that all of these people come flooding into the city, seeking revenge for the years of oppression, seeking revenge for being poor for all of these years. I mean, that's not the view of everyone, but it was a significant fear on the part of a lot of the population in Baghdad. And right now, with the electricity cut off, with not much contact, and apparently people are being prevented from going from their homes. Apparently you need to get a pass to leave your home. This is to prevent a flood of people leaving. So it is very difficult to go outside the house, which would absolutely add to the terror of not knowing what was going on down the block or down the street.
Just about 2.5 hours ago, well, a little longer than that, your friend and colleague, Nick Robertson, reported that the rumor mill in Baghdad, from just talking to his sources, that the rumor mill in Baghdad was working overtime, and that one of the rumors that it was making the rounds is that there was going to be an uprising of some sort and some size in these Shia neighborhoods, which would in some respects might be helpful to the Americans, and in other respects would be terribly complicating depending on whether it was organized or just anarchy.
And it's always been sort of the boogeyman. It's the threat of violence from the Shias, and it's really unclear to anyone how much of that is real and how much is imagined. Now, certainly they have legitimate grievances, and we did see during all the years we were in Baghdad uprisings very quickly put down in places like Saddam City, that Shia neighborhood on the edge of Baghdad. Now, it's basically, we can't put it too politely, it's a slum. People live in horrible conditions. They're crammed together. It's probably one of the poorest parts of Baghdad, and it is a place that is just, with the right spark, could be waiting to explode. Now, that is always a possibility and has always been a possibility, even before this war started. For instance, when Shia clerics were being killed under mysterious circumstances, essentially assassinated, there had been some riots. in Saddam City that were very quickly suppressed, with people being killed and the riots put down. It was, as you know, Aaron, a very effective regime, very effectively in control. So the question has always been, what happens when you lift that control? And the feeling is that U.S. troops coming in are not going to replace those decades of iron control by Iraqi troops, and that extremely effective interlocked system of Iraqi secret police, the web of informers, the Republican Guard, the Ba'ath Party. That's the reason he survived so long, that it was extremely effective. Now, people do fear and have feared for some time that it could result in Shia violence against Sunnis, but at the end of the day, it really depends on what else is happening on the ground, whether there's a power vacuum or whether the American troops and their allies can go in and stabilize things. And right now, the feeling is that it could really very much go either way. Aaron?
Jane, just stay with us here for as long as you can. That's Jane Arraf, who for a long time was the CNN bureau chief in Baghdad, and she has been covering the war from northern Iraq. Reem Brahimi was part of the CNN crew that was not so politely asked to leave Baghdad now a couple of weeks ago. She is in Amman, and she has been watching this from Amman, and she joins us on the phone. Reem?
Yes, Aaron. Well, you can see those tanks on the bridge heading clearly from the west side of the river, which is where most of the government buildings are, to the eastern side of that river, clearly trying to make its way to gather a little more ground, as it were, in Baghdad. Now, we saw earlier on pictures of the Ministry of Planning on fire. It used to be the offices of the Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz and Vice President Tahir Yassin Ramadan. This new picture again showing a bridge. I understand the Al Jazeera building may have been hit. It's a house that hosts a lot of Arab media, but mainly, of course, at Al Jazeera. It's in fact a production company that owns the house and let's say hosts the Al Jazeera reporters and crew there. Apparently, one journalist was seriously injured and another one just slightly injured, and we're hoping to bring you more details on that, Aaron, as soon as we get them. Aaron?
Okay, Reem, just stay with us here. It certainly did look like fire came against the cement or brick of that building, but there's also obviously an American plane in the sky. So
نعم قد اطمأن منذ دقائق أن الجميع نزل على الأرض، لم يعد أحد على السطح.
different angle coming again across the river. There are two American tanks. You can see them on the river. And there was a very large explosion just a moment ago. Reem, you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm watching. It's a huge explosion on that other side of the bridge, near that building.
And these buildings, these low-rise buildings, do you recognize them? Do you know what they are?
Seen from this angle, I would need to have the, if I could have the camera pulled out, it would be nice, but
okay.
I would need to have a bigger view. It looks like from that direction, there has to be something that links them to those government buildings. The one we saw earlier on, Aaron, the Ministry of Planning, is an interesting building because it was hit in the first 3 days of the bombing, and it was totally on fire. In fact, you could see that fire rage all day at one point, and they had blocked the road so that people couldn't actually pass by it and see it from too close, but you could see it from the other side of the river. So it's interesting that it's been again bombed, because one would wonder what there could still be in there.
When this all began for us, when we saw these pictures come up on Abu Dhabi TV, the report was that there was fire of some sort coming from that building or that area, presumably that building.
It's an area that's not far also where the new offices of the Deputy Prime Minister and the Vice President offices are. So it's an area with there's a concentration, if you will, Aaron, of government buildings. And when that building was bombed, the blow from the explosion there also affected the sort of commercial area in the neighborhood. So as you drove past that area, you could see all the shop windows blown out.
As Abu Dhabi TV, the correspondents have described it, this has been an area of many snipers in these high-rise buildings firing down on the Americans. There's these 2 American tanks on the bridge. It is, as you can see, the turret there turning, going up, down, and around.
Yeah.
An American fighter jet in the sky. Pretty much owning the sky. We saw a couple of hours ago, hour and a half ago, an A-10, a very kind of clunky but tough airplane working the sky without any particular fear. It may in fact have been responsible for some of the fire that you saw in that building on the top floor.
But the tanks are still seem to be not moving forward or moving very, very slowly.
They're just holding their position. Reem, stay with us now. I want to switch phone lines, which takes just a second, and bring Jane Arraf back in. Jane is in the northern part of the country, but she's also watching this. As we said earlier, much of the world is right now. At least people who are watching the news around the world, this is pretty much what they're seeing. Jane?
It's interesting, Aaron, the gunfire that we heard just a short while ago when you referred to snipers.
And the helmets, I want the trucks, I want the whole deal. Because that basically says to the world that we're not colonialists here in the USA, which is the garbage they're peddling. And I want that. But I don't want the United Nations making any economic decisions for that country at all, all right, because it came out of my pocket. I paid for that war, and so did every other American who pays taxes. And the British subjects pay their taxes, and they paid for that war. And we get to say who gets the contracts, who gets to administrate, who gets to rebuild. Not Jacques Chirac, that weasel. He doesn't get to say anything, Mr. Tepperman. And if he does, you're going to have 300 million angry Americans over here. Well, 250 million. The other 50 million don't know what they're doing. Go ahead.
Again, I'm not going to take the bait and support Jacques Chirac. But I would go you one further and argue that rather than the White House making the ultimate decisions about investment in Iraq, it should be the Iraqi people. So there will be a short...
No, they can't. They're not qualified to do it.
At the moment,
they're just not qualified to do it.
Well, the question then is, are we arguing about the short term or the long term?
Mr. Tepperman, just like the Marshall Plan, all right, in Europe after World War II. The German people didn't make those decisions.
As a matter of fact, they did.
That's insane.
Mr. Riley, I beg to differ. Although the funding decisions came from Washington,
who's Marshall named
it was
after?
Actually a lot of the administrative decisions were made in both France and Germany.
No, they were not. The decisions were made by General Marshall, and then they were carried out by the indigenous population. Am I wrong, Doctor, or what?
No, I think you're quite correct there. I think we have to look very carefully at why the French, the Russians, and the Germans, for example, are pushing for a UN role in Iraq. They wish to use the United Nations as a Trojan horse through which they can put their own administrators, troops on the ground in Iraq in order to protect their own strategic and economic interests. Let's not forget that these nations have appeased a brutal dictatorship for decades, and they should play no role whatsoever in the future of the Iraqi people.
And not only that, Doctor, they have relationships with Iraqis who will be involved in the reconstruction because the French and the Germans and the Russians sold these people all kinds of stuff in violation, Mr. Tepperman, that we're finding out now, of the UN sanctions.
Absolutely.
I mean, a lot of the U.S. casualties came from Russian weapons that were sold to Saddam. And who's in Moscow right now? Kofi Annan Is he scolding Putin? I don't think so. There's a lot of hypocrisy at the UN's doorstep, sir, and they better be very careful here, I think.
I agree with you 100%, and I'm not advocating giving the UN the job of making economic investment decisions in Iraq, because I think that it would be a mistake. All that I'm urging is that we get into a position where a democratic Iraq can make those decisions as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's fine, and that'll take 10 years. And in the meantime, the United States and the United Kingdom, all right, will tell the indigenous Iraqi population how it's going to be for their own good, so that we don't get involved in this warfare, this tribalism, the Shiites against the Sunnis, the Kurds against this. We can't allow that to happen. Just as we've administrated Afghanistan by building out from Kabul, the same thing's going to happen, Doctor, in Iraq. And we don't need Jacques Chirac in there at all, only for public relations, right?
Yes, I think it's imperative that we have a US-British-led administration in a post-war Iraq, which will be in place for a period of 6 to 12 months until we have an Iraqi interim authority in place. But I believe that if we placed the control of that administration in the hands of the United Nations, it would be an absolute disaster. The UN simply does not have, the UN does not have the experience to do it.
Yeah, those people can't even pay their parking tickets in New York City, and you're going to let them rebuild Iraq? I don't think so. And plus, there's they have lost their moral authority, as you said, Doctor. Do you agree with that, Mr. Tepperman? Has the UN lost its moral authority?
I think it's a little difficult to talk about the UN as a monolith, because you have to remember that it's a car with 195 drivers. So the Germans, the French, the Russians are certainly not in very good repute right now. But the UN does, remember, do certain things, such as provide aid very well. And so we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and insist that for moral reasons we're going to deny the UN any role, especially when it'll serve our own interests, I think, to use them to help defray costs.
Well, we all agree on that. We all agree we have to play the PR game with the United Nations. But as far as any serious decisions, Gentlemen, thanks very much. We appreciate it. In a moment, the most controversial story of the evening. A Princeton professor believes America is ethically wrong in placing a higher value on the defense of its citizens than on the lives of civilians in places like Iraq. That professor will enter the no-spin zone in just a few moments.
This program is brought to you by Fuji Photo Film, a leading provider of professional and broadcast audio and video recording products.
During cancer treatment, Elizabeth could only watch from the sidelines. Today, her cancer is in remission, and she's ready to play.
Elizabeth is one of millions of children with hope because of Children's Miracle Network. We are the alliance of premier children's hospitals dedicated to serving all children. Your support can make miracles happen.
With so many movies, there's always one that fits your attitude. Comcast Digital Cable. Your life connected.
Vietnam, but I wasn't the only soldier there. There was another soldier, Christy Lane.
Christy Lane has touched the hearts of millions through her beautiful singing of One Day at a Time. I'm only human. And now, with all the turmoil in the world today, you will find comfort and strength in these 47 classics.
Help me believe in what I could be and all that I...
Truly two great albums, One Day at a Time and Footprints.
One set of footprints in the sand.
Call now and save over 50% on this priceless collection.
Lord, you promised me you'd hold my hand. I believe in angels.
Over 2 hours of beautiful singing by Christy on 2 CDs or 2 cassettes for the special price of $14.99 plus shipping. Call now, 1-800-214-3399. A beautiful gift for someone you love.
In the Back of the Book segment tonight, writing in the Los Angeles Times, Dr. Peter Singer, who teaches bioethics at Princeton University, says that the lives of Iraqi civilians should be on an equal moral plane with those of Americans. Therefore, we are wrong to wage war against Saddam Hussein. Dr. Singer joins us now from New York. Doctor, I probably didn't do justice to your column. I mean, I read it, but I want you to define the main point in it for the audience, and then we'll bat it around.
Well, the main point is the first part of what you said, that I think we should not consider a human life to be worth less because it's a member of the Iraqi people rather than American. And I don't think the American people are being seriously enough concerned about the fact that, by rough estimates, about 1,000 Iraqi civilians have been killed during this war. I think that ought to be a major factor in making us think about what we're doing. And despite what I see as a lot of public relations spin about minimizing civilian deaths, there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, the Americans are often firing where they shouldn't be firing and are too trigger happy, with a lot of civilian casualties resulting. I think that's a tragedy.
Well, until that's proven, I think that it would be irresponsible for you and I to discuss it until it's proven.
Well, if I can say so, you just talked earlier in the program about the tank shell that killed 2 journalists.
Mistakes are going to be made.
That gets a lot of attention. That gets a lot of attention. But when it's non-journalists, just Iraqi civilians who are being killed, it doesn't get so much attention, of course. But we know that it's happening.
All right, look, nobody wants anybody killed. And you bring out the Iraqi civilians, all right? And the Pope makes the same argument that you do. However,
good, I'm glad we agree for once.
Yeah, I think you might have written a column when 400,000 individuals, human beings, were killed by Saddam Hussein, 200,000 Kurds and 200,000 of his own people after the '91 war. I didn't see your column in the LA Times then.
Well, the LA Times didn't ask me to comment at that time. If they had, I certainly would have written a column.
Come on, Doctor, don't play games with me.
No, that's not a game.
Right? I'm not one of your Princeton students here. What I'm saying to you, sir, is this. By allowing Saddam Hussein to stay in power, he will kill far more civilians that will be killed in a crossfire situation with American troops.
Well, we don't know how many civilians would have been killed. Certainly in the past he did, but of course the Americans supported him by supplying him with some of the biological and chemical weapons that he killed thousands of Kurds. That is true. So the Americans were not concerned about it then, and I didn't hear you attacking the Americans for supplying Saddam with those poison weapons at the time when he was killing Kurds. So I don't think you should throw any stones about me at that.
He was supplied with those weapons, as you know, sir, to fight Iran, all right,
yes.
who was at that time much more of a threat with much more of a threat to the United States.
So America was following its national interest and not so concerned about the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis or Iran who were killed by Saddam that you were just talking about.
What I'm saying to you is you and the people who have brought these questions up, all right, don't seem to be concerned about allowing a dictator, a brutal man, a maniac, all right, to continue to rule, all right? You only are concerned about the United States removing him with force, and I see that as, let's be kind, being naive.
No, I am very concerned about the people that Saddam was killing. I'm concerned, for that matter, about the people that the Burmese military are killing. I'm concerned about the people that the North Koreans are killing. But, you know, we don't have a world at this stage where we go around and say, who are the worst dictators? Let's remove them. Maybe we should have such a world, but we would have to see, you know, do that collectively. I don't think it would be right for one nation to take for itself the power to say, we're going to decide who's the worst dictator and we're going to remove them. I think we ought to go to an independent body like the United Nations.
Sir, the reason that happened in this case is Saddam Hussein clearly violated international law by the mandates that he refused to adhere to issued by the United Nations. So we had a legal right to go in and remove him. We have removed him. We are going to save far more lives that are being lost. And I believe that you're on the wrong side of this argument politically and morally, but I'm going to give you the last word.
Thank you. I think we should show that we are really concerned about innocent human life by taking much greater care than we have, by not, for example, firing at people when they have 5 seconds to get away from a roadblock, as Lieutenant Colonel Scudder was quoted in the New York Times as saying he would. If they don't move in 5 seconds, they're dead, he said. I don't think that's an attitude that shows that the American military has great respect for innocent human life. Anyone can make a mistake.
I think you're doing a great disservice to your country, sir, because by all accounts, the American military has been very restrained over there.
I think there's more spin in that than reality, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I think you're wrong, but we'll leave it there as a gentleman's disagreement. Doctor, thanks very much. We appreciate you coming on, taking the fire, pardon the pun. And next, we will wrap things up with the most ridiculous item of the day and some of your men.
Stay tuned for Hannity and Combs coming up next. Did Saddam Hussein survive last night's bunker buster bombs? If he's still alive, does he have any control over Iraq? We'll talk to Bill Bennett. And a U.S. tank shell struck a hotel where journalists are staying in Baghdad. Was that a fair target? We'll ask former Attorney General Ed Meese. And don't forget about the original target in the war on terror, a new audio tape that maybe Osama bin Laden encourages suicide attacks against the U.S. We'll talk about all that coming up on Hannity and Combs.
You think about designing an SUV with room for 7 people and room for the things that 7 people like to take along. But mostly, you think about the 7 people themselves and how an SUV can finally help protect each and every one of them. You think about that, then you build.
The new Volvo XC90, the first SUV equipped with third-row safety curtains, a roll stability control system, and guided by conscience.
Life got simple the day I plugged into the big brown machine. West Coast overnight, done. China, 48 hours, done. Brown picks it all up together and delivers it all on time. And with their global tracking system, I get the proof. It isn't that I'm not a trusting person. Yes, it is.
International Overnight Ground Synchronized. UPS. What can Brown do for you?
The GMC Yukon XL Denali.
I blow through here, and the music goes down and round.
The tightest turning radius in its class.
And comes on here. Press the first valve down, and the music
Professional
goes down
grade engineering. It's not more than you need, just more than you're used to.
and comes on here.
Time now for the most ridiculous item of the day. The Publication Television Week is out with its annual list of the 10 most powerful people in television news. And your humble correspondent is number 2. I demand a recount. The one guy more powerful than I allegedly am is NBC News President Neil Shapiro, who I knew very well. And he's indeed a powerful and frightening guy. The only other personality on the list is NBC's Tim Russert, who is also very powerful and frightening. I am frightened of both of those men, which may be ridiculous. Finally tonight, the Mail. Barbara Hubbard, Boalsburg, Pennsylvania. Bill, nice work in boldly pointing out that some newspaper editors editorialize their political views with their hard news headlines. So much for unbiased journalism in today's world. Don Davidson, Brenham, Texas. Bill, why are you so concerned about what the New York Times has to say? Don't you know 90% of Americans don't read that paper? Mr. Davidson, you might not know that the New York Times reports go out on their newswire to thousands of newspapers all over the world. Also, some TV news operations take the tone of their coverage directly from the Times. That newspaper is extremely powerful. David Thomas, Malibu, California. O'Reilly to suggest that 2 of the most respected newspapers in the world, the LA Times and the New York Times, would shift editorial policy because of what you said on your stupid little TV program is laughable. Pat Dixon, Santa Rosa, California. O'Reilly, your ego is exceeded only by your paranoia. Dean Alport, Clancy, Montana. The New York Times tried to slant the war coverage but got spanked by the Big O. You're quite a disciplinarian. Were you this tough on your students? Only when they were intellectually dishonest, Mr. Alport. Robert Birchfield, Chattanooga, Tennessee, has a limerick for us. Ye old New York Times is wily, printing bias and slanting so slyly. But to their chagrin, you shot through their spin. O'Reilly, O'Reilly, O'Reilly. Wow, Robert, great poem. Sending you a signed copy of the No Spin Zone paperback in appreciation. Did I mention it was number 1 on the? Yes, I did. I'm sorry. Don't want to be redundant, but we appreciate it very much. Sarah Longstaff, Tucson, Arizona. Bill, you asked what's up with the women of Tucson after hearing the 2 of them don't like the factor. My husband loves your program, but I used to make him turn it off because it makes my blood pressure go sky high and my shoulders tense up. Sarah, I am available for massages if you give me a little notice. Autry Windle, Tucson. Bill, I adore you, but my husband doesn't. I can't help it if his good taste is confined to choosing a wife. Sherry Ramsey, Tucson. O'Reilly, the office I work in is full of women, and each day we listen to the radio factor. We Tucson women think you're terrific. Well, I appreciate that. Andrewina Irwin, Royersford, Pennsylvania. Bill, I think you are dedicating too much time to saying how cute you are. I don't think that guy should dump his fiancée for you. Andreina, I think you might have rephrased that. I just suggested if he's not allowed to watch The Factor, he might want to rethink the fiancé situation. Barry Dixon, Charleston, West Virginia. O'Reilly, while our troops fight for justice on the battlefield, you fight for justice in the media. You are a fierce warrior. Mr. Dixon, I want to be a fair warrior, and I appreciate your letter very much. Now I want to give you some information. Friends of David Bloom, the NBC correspondent who died in Iraq, have set up a trust fund for his children's education. If you wish to help these kids, please send your donations to Latham and Watkins. Latham and Watkins, 885 3rd Avenue, Suite 1000, 885 3rd Avenue, Suite 1000, New York, New York, 10022. We will also post that address on our website, and the website address is www.foxnews.com/O'Reilly. So if you get online with us, we will have that trust fund for David Bloom's children, send them to college, and a very sad situation. He has 3 little kids. Nothing really else you could say, but we wish our condolences to his family. How about email us with some pithy comments, O'Reilly@foxnews.com, O'Reilly@foxnews.com. We're enjoying reading the foreign mail. All right, so anywhere in the world, you can get us on your internet and zip in an email to us telling us how terrible we are or how perspicacious we are. And my staff does not know what that word means. And that is it for us today. As always, we thank you for watching The Factor. Please remember the Radio Factor, Westwood One. They listen in Tucson. Hannity and Colmes is next. Bill Bennett will be on. I'm Bill O'Reilly reporting this evening from Miami, Florida. We do hope to see you again next time. And remember, the spin stops right here in Miami.
Welcome to Hannity and Colmes. I'm Alan Colmes. Joining us now on the phone, Oliver North with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Ollie, good to see you. You've been doing some great reporting.
Thank you. I unfortunately am stuck 75 miles east of Baghdad. I was on a hunter-killer mission yesterday with elements of the Marine Air Group 39. What they do is they send up 2 Cobras and 2 armed Hueys to go out and simply look for targets. The good news in all this, there are relatively few targets.
على الطرف الآخر هذا خط لجانب كاميرا تلفزيون أبو ظبي. ظن منذ دقائق أن الجميع نزل على الأرض، يعد أحد على السطح. Can I be on TV too?
Right now we're in the Secretariat, which is, as I understand, a Special Republican Guard strong point, surrounded by barracks and other towers.
And there you go. Some of the sights and sounds of the war, some of them very brutal, and some of them a little more lighthearted. That's the palace. I've been calling it Kelly Palace. They've got the camera on the shoulder now and are showing us around. I wonder I guess if he's alive, he could be watching. They seem to watch us a little bit over there. Saddam, there's a tank in your front yard. Would you look at that? I guess this means we're taking a break first. When we come back from the break, I'm going to talk to Greg Kelly about this thing with the information minister and whatever that was all about. And he's going to give us a little tour of Kelly's palace straight away.
beat anybody's price. I'll beat his price.
Tired of double talk? Here's a real sale. Suzuki's once-a-year move fast.
Protection. It's not what it guards you against. It's what it lets you do. Continue. Ace Group, Global Protection.
Hey, you're gonna love this new Quick Rent at National Car Rental.
When you get to the airport, they let you choose your own car.
Whatever make and model you want.
Whatever color you want. You can walk right past the counter.
And you don't stand in any lines.
All you need is a major credit card and access to the internet. You rent online at nationalcar.com.
They ought to call it quick and easy.
Bypass the counter. You don't have to stand in line. Choose your own car.
Click, click, click on the computer.
It's all about me. Rent, huh?
Choose the rental car company that lets you choose your own car. Quick Rent at nationalcar.com.
Tomorrow, Eye on Iraq. U.S. forces tighten their grip on Baghdad, and investors keep a tight watch over the markets. What is the smart money looking for? Find out on Your World with Neil Cavuto.
"42 minutes past the hour." That's 42 minutes past 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in Baghdad, and Greg Kelly's just lounging around the house there. I heard we were going to get a little show and tell, but first I want to ask you, Greg, the other day, as you were going on your historic, did you know that you're the only American cable television news journalist, or any of the others, to be reporting from that palace or report from those parade grounds, that you're the only one that was anywhere for that whole day, and that everybody else kind of on every other network relied on you for your reports? Did you know that equipment isn't perfect? We lost him for the moment. I don't know if he knew any of that stuff or not. I mean, it's not like he can sit there at the palace and watch Fox News. I mean, that'd make life better, I'm sure, but he can't do it. And then there's this business about the journalists who were shot and killed at the hotels, at the two hotels. And you know, I've gotten a lot of mail about this. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of mail from people saying, what the heck were they doing there in the first place? And you know what? The Founding Fathers thought that this nation needed freedom of the press so that regular citizens who decided to be journalists could check up on the government, which is of, by, and for the people. That's why the government said, we're not going to stop you from going, but we can't ensure your safety over there. Well, now they're over there, and they're reporting on what happened, and some of them are saying, well, the troops should have known better than to shoot on this hotel. Those people who are reporting from that hotel have Iraqi minders with them. Now, keep that in mind. I told you the story about Kerry Sanders from the battlefield saying that they took 6-year-old girls out there and used them as human shields, the military did, and those little girls were shot and killed. But the military who shot them had no idea they were even there. Now, fast forward to these hotels. Iraqi minders. How different are the minders from the military? What's Christian Pelt doing when he's up there on that building in the middle of the night? He's probably trying to keep himself alive. Christian Pelt made a decision to go over there and be your eyes and ears in this war without the military looking over his shoulders. And now the rules have changed. And now there are minders there. And now he's scared for his life, and who wouldn't be? A lot of mail from people saying, screw those journalists. They shouldn't have been there in the first place. They're getting in the way. They're there for you, just like those soldiers. And I pray that those soldiers come home every night. And I pray those journalists do too, embedded or not. And that attitude's nasty and wrong. Since we have time, it is. Leventhal's back with us. You're all right, huh, buddy?
Yeah, I'm fine. And obviously our goal is to bring the Marine stories home. You know, that's why we're here.
Okay.
I can tell you that in this...
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to report that we've been hearing a steady thumping of either artillery or bombs dropping off in the distance, but it has been going on now for, I'd say, at least 15 minutes. We also have a couple of M1 Abrams tanks in the street, down the street from where we're sitting. And we have heard some small arms fire, just a gunshot here, a gunshot there, nothing sustained, and nothing right at the position where we're sitting.
But still, your guys, Rick is traveling with Marine reservists who've been called up to active duty, and from what I can tell from research done on the computer by whoever does the research, this is the first time they've used reservists since Vietnam.
And they're the only Marine Infantry Reserve unit here in in Iraq. There are reservists also attached to the 3rd LAR, the 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, that we were embedded with prior to this.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to say these are the only ones. Just this is the first time, as far as our researchers can tell.
Yes, you are correct. As far as I was told the same thing. It's the first time since Vietnam that reservists were used in war.
I guess they're all holding up pretty well, but I figure if you go from a desk job and suddenly you're wandering the streets of Baghdad, I mean, there's some adjusting to be done.
Well, absolutely. These guys are, the two that I've talked to in the last few minutes. One worked at Sears, and the other, is a police officer, and now they're in the streets of Baghdad, and people are shooting at them. More people than for the police officer, more people than usual. It's a serious adjustment that's taking place. This is a dangerous place to be right now.
You were mentioning the last... sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the satellite thing. It's hard to figure out, but I'm trying. You were mentioning the last time that it looked like the city was kind of waking up and that a store had opened and the rest. Are you seeing more activity now? It's what, 10 to 9 now?
Yeah, I guess they're slow to wake up here. We were up at 4 a.m. So it felt like the day had been long already. I see some people walking on the sidewalk across the street. There have been a few vehicles that have tried to pass our position, and the Marines have stopped them and turned them around the other way. A couple of the vehicles, by the way, said UN on the doors. My understanding was the UN pulled all its people out of here. So if the UN's missing a couple of SUVs, I saw them, and they're on the road, and someone's driving them.
Well, we'll pass that right along to the United Nations. I hear they're big fans of the Rick and Greg Kelly show. We got to hit a break, Rick. I'm going to come right back on the other side and find out what it's like on the streets. We're also going to try to get back to Greg Kelly to ask that question if we can get the satellites working. You know, it's only 6,000 miles away, but we're working on it. Hang on. Top of the hour headlines are coming as well, and strike up the War Orchestra.
Fox News Channel first.
We've got the city sealed off by U.S. military. The city is ours.
The latest on the war. Live. Fox News Channel. Real journalism. Fair and balanced.
His desire made him a champion. Now his pride gives a dangerous opponent one last shot at greatness. Marco Antonio Barrera.
It's about honor.
Kevin Kelly.
Barrera is mine.
For the featherweight championship of the world. Barrera versus Kelly. Saturday, April 12th, live on In Demand pay-per-view.
Order it on In Demand pay-per-view from Comcast.
It's about winning. Bring it on.
What are you watching?
Fistful of Dollars.
No, you're not.
I think I know a Clint Eastwood movie when I see one.
Oh, really? So I guess that's Clint churning butter?
The info button. Know what you're watching before it's too late. From Comcast Digital Cable, your life connected.
Years, people have turned to us for answers to their questions about hair loss and hair restoration.
So what is natural hair restoration? Where does the hair come from? Is it permanent?
Does the hair actually grow?
To find out, just call this toll-free number. We'll send you this free video and comprehensive guidebook that give you the real facts about hair loss and the choices you have for dealing with it. Financing is available, so call now and discover how Bosley Medical has advanced the science of natural hair restoration, how they use your own living hair to fill in the thin spots. You'll also meet people who were once losing their hair and see what they looked like then and now.
But here's the big question. Do you think my barber will remember me?
Learn about all your options. Call now and get the information you need to determine if hair restoration is right for you.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a compulsive gambler.
This April, John Corbett stars in a new original series where the odds just keep getting odder. Lucky, Tuesdays on FX.
Ten minutes to the hour now. Reservists were used in Gulf War I. Or so says 100 emailers thus far in the last couple of minutes, and the research department figured it out, and it's the truth. Speaking of reservists, Greg Kelly is a Marine Reserve, but now he's hanging out with the Army. We've exhausted that series of jokes, so I'll leave it alone. But the other morning, Greg, when you were out there all by yourself and no other reporters around, just on Fox, it did a 5.3, by the way, and you were talking about this takeover that was happening, I listened as a man with whom you were speaking from the Army said, we're going to go over there and talk to Baghdad Bob, the Ministry of Information guys we've nicknamed him, and tell him we're here. Did they ever have that conversation?
They didn't. They wanted to, and there was a lot of excitement about it. They were thinking about dropping by the press conference as it was in progress to let them know, hey, United States Army is here. But they had a few other things to do. They had to go seize that parade ground, and that's when he started giving his press conference. That's when they really wanted to know where he was. It was over, I think, in about 2 or 3 minutes, so they never did have that rendezvous. They're hoping it's going to happen sooner or later. So do you want to check out Saddam's palace?
I do, but I want to ask you one more question. Just a quick follow-up, as they'd say at the White House, but that's not allowed. Just the follow-up is, though, wasn't it a short time? Because originally the reports that you were getting on the ground there were that they had surrounded the Ministry of Information and they had surrounded the Al Rashid Hotel, but that surrounding didn't last very long. They ended up bugging out of there pretty quickly, didn't they?
Yes, and it's unclear whether they actually, in fact, surrounded it. They had a significant military presence in that area. Apparently that press conference was happening at the Palestine Hotel, I believe. They had pulled out of the Al Rashid. They stopped doing them there a couple of days earlier, but there was a significant military presence there. They wanted to establish their presence, but, you know, in those initial hours, they had to think a lot about, you know, tactics on the ground, not so much about symbology at first. And now it's a big part of it is about symbology, like the palace. You ready?
I'm ready. I like that, symbology. Go at it, my brother.
All right, well, look, we got here 48 hours ago. Mal, take a look at the front gate. You were probably watching, Shep, shortly after we got through, but we came through with about a dozen or so at first. M1 tanks busted right through that main gate. You can see on the ground that tanks aren't too friendly to Saddam's front lawn. We are not landscapers by any means. One tank busted right through this hedge line. Tanks have been operating, and Bradley fighting vehicles, other tracked vehicles all over the place. And there's a lot of security going on right now. You can only see a small portion of the military presence right now. This tank, believe me, it is not the only one. This place is surrounded, a lot of them back in that tree line. Mal, take a look over here at the palace itself. We went in there with you, Shep, you'll remember, shortly after we got here. The right side of the building is pretty much uninhabitable. That's where a JDAM hit. Now, the left side, that's where there are troops sleeping right now. There are American troops in there right now. We went in shortly after we got here. We were thankful that there were no Iraqis inside. But as you can see, there's kind of an air of permanence. We got soldiers kind of hanging out. If they're not on patrol, they come closer to the building. They can wash up. They can eat. They can relax a little bit. And they're doing this all on Saddam Hussein's front lawn. Now, not to forget, this is a military situation. Check out over here in the tennis courts.
Tennis courts.
I don't know if you can see those. Yeah, they're not serving. We're not playing any tennis right now. Those are Iraqi enemy prisoners of war being held right there. Now, they have been there for some time, and we get more of them from time to time. They weren't all seized. In fact, most of them were not seized on this compound. They were seized in the general area around here. Some of these guys who are not happy that we are here. We're told, though, that they are generally cooperating, generally well-behaved, no escape attempts or anything like that. Now, we stayed one night in the palace, Shep, and that was enough. It's kind of crummy in there. You know, you hear about the opulence and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it was at one time. We're back outside. Check out the Fox Hummer. This thing made it from Kuwait City all the way here. We're doing okay with it. It's kind of our shelter. Check out where we slept last night there, Mal. What we do is we throw a tarp on the ground. That was good enough for Mal James, photographer, and Ben Johnson, the engineer. I tried it out. I hate sleeping on the ground, so I went over to the hood of the Humvee. That's where Mal, I lost you. Hopefully you still have us. Anyway, hey, what are you guys putting on my bed anyway? There's my sleeping bag, and but Mal's putting all of his other trash up there as well. Anyway, so we are here. We obviously have a presence here. So does the 2nd Brigade Combat Team. Although things look quiet now, there are patrols ongoing throughout the city. The 2nd Brigade Combat Team tells us that they really have accomplished the bulk of their mission. They're still dealing with these pockets of resistance. They're still waiting for the Marines to take the eastern side of the city. And believe me, tell Rick to be careful. A lot of these guys who have been giving us a hard time are coming from the east side of the city. Last night there was an amphibious raid. They came over in about 15 boats. That is considered to be a stronghold by the unit commander of Special Republican Guard forces and paramilitary forces. They all seem to be coming from there, so a lot of our attention is focused just east of here.
We've been able
what
to.
Do you think, Shep?
That's great to hear. We've actually been able to get that information to Rick over the last few hours, it's my understanding. I think they're getting the heads up that you're sending. We're trying to all do a lot of communicating. Two quick things. Those prisoners of war over there, how are they being treated? What are they getting?
They're being treated fairly well, and you can actually see them respond well to U.S. troops. Take another look over there at the EPWs.
Not too close.
Yeah, right over there. They're given MREs. They're given water. Their hands were tied for most of the day. You can see that one guy, he may have his hands untied, but as far as I know, we haven't been over there in a few hours, actually since yesterday. We'll check it out, but their hands are tied. They're allowed to talk to each other, and they're looking to get these guys out of here. They kind of want to get them off their hands. EPWs are a bit of a logistics burden, but they're behaving fairly well. Apparently, they've been interrogated, and some have given some useful information, as have a lot of the other EPWs the 2nd Brigade have captured throughout this conflict.
Certainly can't hope our EPWs are being treated half that well, and the truth thus far is that the evidence suggests some of them have been treated completely differently. Man, Greg, hang in there, buddy. Can't wait to see you when you get home. Probably owe you a Pepsi and a side of fries or something by then. Be safe. Tell Mal hello. Even Ben Johnson. Appreciate it. Our coverage is continuing in just a moment. You'll get the headlines at the top of the hour, all the latest war briefs, and our correspondents in the field. That's all straight away. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon for Studio B, tomorrow night for the Fox Report, and right back here on the Overnight. I'm Shepard Smith in New York. Stay brave, stay aware, stay with Fox.
Revolution or evolution.
Nationwide. Call Scott Trade at 1-800-619-SAVE or visit scotttrade.com.
Protection. It's not what it guards you against. It's what it lets you do. Continue. Ace Group, Global Protection.
From my 30 years of military service, I know war is tough on families. Here and abroad, the American Red Cross helps people in these very trying times. We keep men and women in the armed forces connected with loved ones during emergencies. We also deliver humanitarian aid to those caught in the crossfire. We need your financial help now, so please call 1-800-HELP-NOW or visit redcross.org. Thank you.
Tomorrow, the international community prepares for a post-Saddam Iraq. Looming questions remain unanswered. Who will govern and how? Plus, another bin Laden message. Can he convince terrorists to carry out a deadly chain of homicide attacks? Get the latest developments. At 5, it's the big story. At 6, watch Special Report. At 7, it's the Fox Report.
Along with Brian Wilson in Washington. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Yesterday was April 8th, day 20 of the war in Iraq. We want to start our hour off with a recap of the day's events, as we call it, the action of the day.
Leadership structure has been fragmented. We've seen that the ability for the regime to communicate instructions has been disrupted. We've seen that the application of authority has been interfered with on a number of occasions by coalition action. And we're not certain exactly who's in charge at this point in time.
We're waiting to learn if Saddam Hussein and his sons were killed. The pilot who dropped the bomb says he was told it was the big one.
U.S. officials confirming today that they did indeed target a residential neighborhood in western Baghdad, where it is believed that a number of senior Iraqi leaders, including President Saddam Hussein and his 2 sons, were holding a meeting.
We can begin to talk to you about some of the facts of that mission. First of all,
It was intelligence on the ground relayed to the pilots, and within 1 hour of that first intelligence and the first coordinates of where to strike was obtained, that's how long it took for the bombs to fall, 1 hour.
What we have for battle damage assessment right now is essentially a hole in the ground, a site of destruction where we wanted it to be.
The 4th Infantry, the Army's most lethal, heavily armored division, tanks with space-age technology and GIs with a decades-long tradition of victory are all now being deployed on the sands of Kuwait.
This is one of the most famous cavalry regiments in the United States Army. It was formed in 1866. It was an all-black cavalry regiment. Now fast forward now to 2003, part of Task Force Iron Horse, and you're looking at the most modernized, best trained, best equipped cavalry squadron in the whole world.
They showed me examples of their state-of-the-art armor, including the fully digitized M1A2 tank. The enemy has no choice but to scatter and hide.
Baghdad today turning deadly for a number of journalists covering the war from the capital city. The Baghdad office of the Al Jazeera News Network was destroyed in a U.S. strike this morning. Central Command confirmed a short while ago that U.S. commanders on the ground reported coming under heavy, significant fire from the building.
When they are fired at, they have not only the right to respond, they have the obligation to respond.
And this new Iraq that will emerge is not to be run either by us or indeed by the UN. That is a false choice. It will be run by the Iraqi people. All of us will do what we can to help in that process of transition.
A firefight ensued with some of the tanks that are here. It got so hot that they decided to pull back the American tanks and call in close air support. A-10 Warthogs came in straight, sprayed bullets on those trucks. 50 to 100 Iraqis killed in this immediate vicinity. For now, they are holding this position on the west side of the Tigris River. The Marines are working on the east side, and they are still hoping that just the presence of American military tanks in this town will be enough to crumble the regime.
We are sitting in the center of the city with almost an armor brigade right now, which is extraordinary. So if you put it in that kind of context, I think the end game is the end of the regime, and that's much closer than people thought it was.
Well, fighting continues in and around Baghdad at this hour, and Saddam Hussein's fate certainly remains a mystery. Let's check in again with Kelly Wright, who's standing by at the Pentagon. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Lori. It does remain a mystery, doesn't it? But President Bush was asked that question today. Is Saddam Hussein alive or dead? The president said he doesn't know, but he does know this. Saddam Hussein is losing control of the Iraqi people, and he's losing the grip of his Iraqi regime. We show you now somewhere in the rubble of this massive 60-foot crater. Defense officials believe suspected leaders of the Iraqi regime might be buried there. That after a B-1 bomber dropped 4 2,000-pound precision bombs on the site. The strike called in after credible human intelligence indicated Saddam, his 2 sons, and members of the Iraqi regime were there.
We had asked, can we hit our original targets as well? We were told, negative, we need you to go direct towards this target. Guys, this might be the big one.
2 British newspapers are reporting that Saddam Hussein and his sons Uday and Qusay survived or escaped that attack Monday afternoon. British intelligence sources reportedly say Saddam had been in the building earlier but left minutes before the bombs hit. Meantime, defense officials at the Pentagon say it's too early to determine if Saddam escaped the blast. Meantime, as coalition ground forces move through the heart of Baghdad, the area has become increasingly dangerous for everyone, including journalists. At the Palestine Hotel, 2 TV cameramen from the Ukraine and Spain were killed and 3 others wounded. CENTCOM says U.S. troops observed snipers firing from the hotel when they gave return fire. A Jordanian journalist who once worked for Fox News, he was working for Al Jazeera at the time, was killed when the network's Baghdad office was hit during an airstrike.
War zone is a dangerous place. Baghdad in particular, we believe, would be a dangerous place. We continue to warn people, we continue to warn news organizations about the dangers. We've had conversations over the last couple of days. News organizations eager to get their people unilaterally into Baghdad, and we are saying it is not a safe place, you should not be there.
Baghdad not a safe place at all, and some of the defense officials here at the Pentagon also say that it's quite possible that the Iraqi regime is so treacherous that it could have actually placed reporters in the Palestine hotel, then poised snipers in that hotel to draw fire from U.S. forces, and then as a result of that, they would have the kind of propaganda to say, aha, look at what the U.S. forces are doing now, is doing now. So, Laurie, just incredible things going on in the battlefield, a lot of noise out there as we're hearing reports from our embed reports. It just continues to go on. But again, President Bush, the commander-in-chief, and the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld saying that the days of the Iraqi regime are indeed numbered.
Kelly Wright at the Pentagon, thank you very much. So, Brian, it's good to get that reminder from our president that Saddam's days are numbered. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, and may already be numbered. We wait to find out what happened
true.
at that restaurant the other day. We were reporting on about this time last night. Look, there's so much going on, you know, around the region. We thought it'd be a good time to stop and talk to former Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, who is one of our Fox News foreign analysts here. A whole list of things that I'd like to chat with you about tonight, Mark. First of all, let's talk about this journalist thing one more time, and then I'm going to let it go. We got other things, other fish to fry. It was a tragic thing. But I think it's important to touch on one thing, and that is how it's being reported by Al Jazeera and the other Arab networks.
Al Jazeera is being somewhat reasonable compared to the other networks.
Really?
Al Jazeera is reporting from its Doha headquarters, Brian, that the Al Jazeera folks had given to CENTCOM the GPS coordinates for the building where their reporters were located before the war began. They're not stating that we intentionally fired at that building. What they're saying is that CENTCOM knew that Al Jazeera was in that building. The inference being, of course, is that if you knew we were in a building, why would you be shooting at it?
I mean, of course, that doesn't mean that the 19-year-old tank gunner knew that.
Of course not. And of course, secondly, now in the Arab world, everyone knows that Al Jazeera has been the antithesis of what we consider to be a reliable, reasonable network, which, of course, in the Arab world, that's not necessarily the case. It is the most popular network. It has been probably viewed as the most anti-war, anti-American network in the Middle East, and therefore the conclusion is going to be, by virtually everybody, is that we intentionally shot and killed an Al Jazeera reporter because we didn't like what Al Jazeera was reporting about this war. Now, of course, most of the Arabs will fail to remind anyone in the Arab world that Al Jazeera itself was kicked out of Baghdad by the Iraqi authorities because the Iraqi authorities didn't like what Al Jazeera was reporting either.
And I should point out that apparently Al Jazeera has decided to pull its correspondents out of downtown Baghdad for the time being. Right. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, you have some concerns, and you have long had some concerns about the Syrians and all that they've been doing in recent days. What's your latest concern?
Well, my concern is that as I've been watching our reports from our embedded military reporters, as watching the battlefield from a broader perspective, it is quite clear to me that as Baghdad has begun to fall, there's been a huge evacuation of the party faithful to Syria. And that Syria, on the one hand, has been exporting into Iraq suicide bombers and other jihadists at the instigation of a regime that sees itself next on the hit list, and at the same time beginning to provide a significant refuge for Saddam's immediate family, for those who are members of the Ba'ath Party, and they're all congregating in the resort town of Latakia, which is in Syria's Mediterranean coast.
And so you think, again, the Syrians are being bad actors on this at this time?
Well, the Syrians essentially have declared long ago that they oppose this war. They're going to do everything to thwart the success of the United States in this enterprise because they do believe that they are going to be targeted. Look, they're the state sponsor of terrorism and the warehouse of evil in all of this. And the fact remains is that we should now be mindful that they are becoming the equivalent of the western territories of Pakistan, where the Taliban fled and which was sort of outside of U.S. control. In effect, what the Damascus government is doing is giving refuge to the criminals that the new Iraqi government will want to try.
Let's talk about the Bush-Blair meeting very quickly. What, in your mind, is the headline out of that session?
The headline on that session is that the president understood that Prime Minister Blair needed to bring back to Europe, not just to old Europe, but to new Europe, a commitment by the United States to ensure that the United Nations would have some significant role to play, but not the primary role, in the humanitarian relief operations and reconstruction of Iraq.
Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, thank you very much for joining us here on the set. He is an invaluable resource to have. You can turn to him and ask him virtually any question about what's going on in the region. He has a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, a lot of background, and we appreciate you being here at this, as I've said, ungodly hour of the night. Lori, just to recap a couple of things that are kind of important. We've got two reporters. This is really kind of amazing when you stop and think about it. We have an embarrassment of riches because we have two embedded reporters who are in Baghdad tonight. One, Greg Kelly, who's still at that presidential palace holding down the fort with the army. And somewhere in East Baghdad, Rick Leventhal is walking through the back streets of Baghdad with a group of Marines, about 100 Marines, reporting in by satellite walkie-talkie. So we hope to hear from them a little bit later. It does appear to me, Lori, I don't know how you feel about it, there's a bit of a lull going on in Baghdad this morning.
Perhaps there is, but we're going to find out right now because, indeed, Greg Kelly is checking in with us. And just to remind everybody, he is with the 3rd ID of the U.S. Army, still standing in front of one of Saddam's two palaces there. And, Greg, what's the news this hour?
Well, Lori, you're right. There is something of a lull, and by a lull, we mean we only hear gunfire and artillery rounds go out every maybe 20 minutes or so, as opposed to constantly like we were hearing yesterday. The fighting continues. The bombs are still dropping, but much less intense than yesterday. Let me tell you about the two most recent counterattacks. Yesterday morning from the east side of Baghdad, a fairly substantial attack from about 50 to 100 Special Republican Guard and paramilitary forces attempting to come over the bridges, I should say, in technical vehicles, these white pickup trucks with guns on top. Close air support was called in. Tanks fired upon them. That attack was defeated rather decisively. And then early this morning, boats from the east side of Baghdad came over. About 15 boats, again armed or equipped with these Special Republican Guard troops. They had recoilless rifles with them. Tanks, again, spotted the movement and opened fire, and again dealt with rather swiftly and decisively. For now, their feeling is here that the bulk of the fighting is behind them, and they will continue to deal with these pockets of resistance, but they believe they have most of their mission accomplished as far as the 2nd Brigade combat team goes, and that they have possession of these major symbolic sites in Baghdad, like the palace I'm coming to you from right now. We went through the city yesterday. The other palace is also secure. Prominent government buildings like the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice have tanks parked right in front of them. They're hoping that this will ultimately send a message to the regime of Iraq, whatever remains, that the U.S. forces are here, they're here to stay, and it's time to give this thing up. And they're basically waiting for some sort of official word from whoever is left in the Iraqi regime that that is actually going to happen. In the meantime, there are lots of questions about Saddam Hussein and his whereabouts. People here are very hungry for information about just how successful that airstrike was about 2 nights ago now. Lori?
Hey, Greg, what about enemy prisoners of war? Are there any around where you are? Are there any being held there near the palace?
There are actually. Ben, do me a favor, just go ahead and take a look at the tennis courts off to our right. I'm not sure how well you can see this picture, but over there are a number of EPWs, enemy prisoners of war. A little bit further to the left, there's one reporter standing there. They seem to have diminished in numbers somewhat. There is another collection point in this area where they are collecting EPWs, but we've had about 30 or so there. I'm pretty sure that most of them were not taken here at the compound. There were 2 groundskeepers who were found here, but most were taken in the fighting that has happened around this compound and around Baghdad that's been going on now for the past couple of days. Several hundred enemy prisoners of war have been taken into the 2nd Brigade's custody since this thing has started.
And Greg, I would assume that coalition forces are trying to glean information from them, and we know that in the past, coalition forces who speak Arabic have been called in to try to talk with them. Is that happening there at this time?
Sure. The 2nd Brigade combat team has an interpreter, and they have civil affairs officers who specialize in interrogating enemy prisoners of war. And there has been some useful information gleaned from these interviews. As I speak to you, I don't know if you can hear that, but that is mortar fire that is outbound. There's actually some high ground around here, and snipers have been working on that high ground. They've been spotted from time to time, and as you can hear, 2nd Brigade responds rather effectively, we hope.
Oh, yeah, it certainly sounds like it. All right, so you said that's outbound mortar fire. Greg, I know you're a Marine, or a former Marine. I guess you're always a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, but you're traveling with the Army. Have you gotten used to the mortar fire yet? Is it becoming sort of second nature once again for the second time in your life?
Well, it has, because we've gotten pretty good at distinguishing which is outbound fire and which is inbound fire. 4 days ago, maybe a week ago, I would have jumped pretty high when I heard that noise, but I could tell immediately that it was outbound mortar fire. It's our own guys shooting at Iraqi forces. So you know that's a good thing, or you know that's not aimed at you, so you can kind of take it in stride. Having said that, whenever a tank goes off, even if it's one of ours, it is the most violent, brutal sound you've ever heard, and still scary, even if you know they're not shooting at you. Lori?
Oh, I can't even imagine. I'm glad you're there and not me. Greg Kelly, traveling with the 3rd ID of the Army, holding court there in front of one of Saddam's palaces right there in the heart of Baghdad. Greg, thank you as always. We're going to check in with you a little bit later. We'll take a break, and Brian Wilson and I will be back in a couple of minutes with more of our continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Watch my dark circles, puffiness, and wrinkles disappear instantly. Sudden Change Under Eye does it. It's guaranteed to give you these results instantly. Sudden Change Under Eye Lift.
If you're overweight, remember 2 words, green tea. Mega Green Tea weight loss caplets can help you lose up to 20 pounds without drugs. Mega Green Tea for fast weight loss.
Suffer with scars from surgery and other causes? Then you need ScarZone, the scar diminishing cream to help fade away scars. Your scars need ScarZone.
From my 30 years of military service, I know war is tough on families. Here and abroad, the American Red Cross helps people in these very trying times. We keep men and women in the armed forces connected with loved ones during emergencies. We also deliver humanitarian aid to those caught in the crossfire. We need your financial help now, so please call 1-800-HELP-NOW or visit redcross.org. Thank you.
So last night the cleaning crew changed the station on my radio. I'll put an end to that. Please leave this radio set to 96.5 FM.
96.5 KOIT. Light rock, less talk.
This kiss.
I saw you in heaven.
That's the way it is.
96.5 KOIT.
Forget to vacuum? Fine. But don't mess with my KOIT.
His desire made him a champion. Now his pride gives a dangerous opponent one last shot at greatness. Marco Antonio Barrera.
It's about honor.
Kevin Kelly.
Barrera is mine.
For the featherweight championship of the world. Barrera versus Kelly. Saturday, April 12th, live on In Demand pay-per-view.
Order it on In Demand pay-per-view from Comcast.
It's about winning.
Bring it on.
Continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom, I'm Brian Wilson in Washington, working with Lori Dew in New York. We're doing that Huntley-Brinkley thing in the last week or so. We want to check in with William LaJeunesse, who is in Kuwait City, and get the perspective from there. William, good morning to you.
Hello, Brian. And you know, indeed, if Basra is going to be a prototype for what's happening or going to happen in Baghdad, it probably pays to understand how Basra is evolving. And right now, that's not too good. It is a complete mess. It is a looter's paradise, as we might say. And let's take a look at there. I mean, there's virtually no law and order right now. The police that belong to the Ba'ath Party, they have fled. The Sheraton Hotel, which you saw on Monday, people throwing carpets and chairs out the window, even took the grand piano out of the lobby. Well, that continued on Tuesday until there was virtually nothing left at all. finally, the Brits put 2 tanks outside so people couldn't take the fixtures and the windows and the rest of the physical structure. Young men are cruising around Basra in pickup trucks and bicycles, grabbing what they can: ceiling fans, car seats, furniture, wooden planks. The telephone system is dead because the looters stripped the utility bare. Water mains have actually been broken into, destroying that infrastructure. People needing fresh water. The British military is trying to maintain some order. When a food convoy was attacked, they stepped in. Some people are even stealing from the thieves. It is true that British Defense Secretary Geoffrey Hoon actually encouraged looting earlier to attempt to kind of create some anarchy and give an indication for the police to leave the city as it crumbled around them. Well, that left. Now they're on the other side trying to stop it. Let's take a look at what is also happening there. From a military point of view, the British do have control, and you can see how it's been received by the people there. Huge crowds are celebrating this end of Saddam. The Brits had a 2-hour meeting with a tribal leader to create a new interim government. That sheikh is a credible Shia Muslim. He is not part of the Ba'ath Party. He has the respect of other tribal leaders, and they hope to form a local town council and a transitional government, and he will hire his own aides, consistent with the President Bush's pledge, that is, to move Iraqis into position of authority as soon as possible. Now, as for the Saddam's regime, as it crumbles, one of the people, the leaders there, part of the Iraqi National Congress who have arrived there, Ahmad Chalabi, he was in Qasr yesterday with people fashioning themselves as freedom fighters. They're really there to help as interpreters and guides for the U.S. military. Also, they went into Nasiriyah yesterday. Chalabi's group is one of many from the United States who will be returning to Iraq to help that country get back on its feet. Now, a CIA report suggests that many of the locals do not want outside help. Condoleezza Rice was speaking publicly the other day, and she said maybe these the Iraqi National Congress and others are there simply to help again stabilize that country, but will not take over leadership positions per se. But of course, that will be eventually up to the Iraqi people. Brian?
William, you know, no matter what you think about Saddam Hussein, I mean, he was a brutal dictator, but he did keep a sense of order in these cities, because people knew that if they didn't behave a certain way, that the Iraqi military and the secret police would crack down upon them. With that lifted now, it sounds like it's going to be a difficult job trying to keep civil order in some of these communities.
Well, what is likely going to occur, of course, is the military police will step in, not your combat troops per se, but in essence some type of peacekeeper force until these local interim councils can begin to either rehire some old policemen or people with some kind of training to begin to get a domestic force. I mean, we saw how Afghanistan was. Whether that will be the model for Iraq, I'm not sure, but it is a long, drawn-out process, and they are literally in this twilight zone, if you will, between this former totalitarian regime, which just, you know, oppressed these individuals. Now they have this newfound freedom, but of course the merchants are partially being victimized because of it. So again, it's an evolving process. I read some British press earlier today that was somewhat impatient, that quoting some Iraqi individuals are saying, listen, my cupboards are bare, I have no fresh water and so forth, looking to the Brits to provide that. Well, that's going to come, but let's be honest, people, and be realistic. You're not going to go from a third world country or conditions into a first world overnight by any means. So they can't even get the humanitarian aid in until it's secure. So we're in a period right now where people just need to be patient. It's easy for me to say, you know, I have 3 meals a day, but nevertheless, people need to be realistic, and it's going to take some time.
You know, the Bush administration before this war started said that they wanted to try to not only go in and liberate Iraq, but they wanted to bring relief, humanitarian relief, as soon as possible. They thought that was one way they could win the hearts and minds of people. But it does sound, as given all the chaos that's going on and the difficulty they've had down south, They're having a bit more difficulty doing that than they perhaps anticipated. William Lajeunesse from Kuwait City, it's good to have you with us. Thank you very much. We want to check in with Captain Chuck Nash, who's at our screenwriter tonight, standing by in our war set. Chuck, let's do a little chalk talk about downtown Baghdad, what areas we control. When I say we, coalition forces control, and also point out that we know where Rick Leventhal is, or well, we know he's in the eastern part of the city, and we got Greg Kelly over in the western part of the city. Talk about what they're doing, what each side of the river is doing right now.
Okay, absolutely, Brian. Let's jump to the screenwriter and we'll diagram that out. What we've got around Baghdad is the Marines have been moving in from the east, and as you were speaking with the embedded reporters, each is doing a different thing. We've got one guy doing actual foot patrols, walking through Baghdad, which is pretty amazing, especially since he's telling us all about it on the cell phone as he does it. Over to the west, Greg Kelly came in with the Marines coming in from this direction. The Marines have also come up from the southeast and recently took an airfield, the Rashid Airfield, down to the southeast, and that's where they found quite a bit of armaments.
Chuck, that's a pretty significant airfield, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's a military airfield, fairly good size, nice facilities. That'll make a nice addition to U.S. forces as we move up in supply. We'll be probably stationing equipment there, and that's also where they found some uniforms that had some blood on them, and they were U.S. uniforms. In particular, they found the chem gear of 2 of the POWs. So right now we've got 7 POWs, 10 missing in action, and that includes the 2 aircrew from the F-15 that went down on Sunday, but was just recently announced because they were doing the combat SAR, search and rescue, and they didn't want to put that information out any earlier than they had to. By the way, an update on the F-18 pilot that's missing. He is still missing, but they have recovered and located his downed aircraft. But back to the Baghdad city overhead. One of the other things that was recently discovered right up in this area is the parade ground and their tomb of their unknown soldier. Just above that area, this area right here, is an amusement park and a zoo. When our forces went in there, what they found were hundreds of artillery pieces and anti-aircraft guns. So did a little house cleaning right there. In the meantime, the 3rd Infantry Division has stationed armor around this portion of Baghdad, what's called the west side of the river here, and made a couple of runs on a couple of bridges here, these 2 right there. Now this is where, this little dot that I'm drawing, is where the Palestine Meridian Hotel is. So there's been activity on that side. That's where the guy now known as Baghdad Bob is giving his press conferences, which, by the way, his press conferences don't recognize any of those symbols that I put on the chart. So he's got his own vision of reality, and unfortunately it is being carried on some of the Arab networks as truth, but it's far from it.
Chuck, let me ask you another question. We are beginning to get some reports, a little bit more detail. Apparently, it is astonishing how many tunnels are underneath the city of Baghdad. Virtually every presidential palace has tunnels that lead to some other building. It's like there's a whole rat's maze underneath this city that we knew it was there, but we're beginning to find out it's much more elaborate than we might have first suspected.
Absolutely, and that's also adding, Brian, to some of the concern and doubt, quite frankly, about did we get Saddam Hussein or not, because he went into a building, and there's actually a, if we go back to the screenwriter, there's an area of Baghdad that's in this little red trapezoid. However, when you zoom in on it, it just so happens that there was a subway line an underground rail line that was built that runs right along here and goes up. This is the train station. But not only are there tunnels in the presidential mansions and palaces, but because of the tunneling activity, some of which they're not really sure of how extensive this was. If you take a look at all those buildings, you know, you could drop down, and Baghdad turns out to be riddled with a lot of these things because the subway system crossed the river and went up and out into the burbs. So you put houses on all those things. Take a look at that housing density just from this satellite photograph, and you could see that you could dig down into a lot of these tunnel complexes as well as the palaces and go into a building, have someone see you go into a building. 45 minutes later, the building vanishes, and you didn't walk out. Well, the question is, did you get out some other way? And that is where, you know, our folks are saying, yeah, they did, but as you pointed out at the top of last hour, British intelligence sources are saying in open source that no, he did get out. So that's going to be kicked around for a while, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Chuck Nash, thank you so much from our screenwriter. We appreciate it. Let's go back up now to New York City and my colleague, Lori Dew.
All right, thanks a lot, Brian and Captain Nash. And joining me here on the set once again is Colonel David Hunt, Fox News military analyst. Let's look ahead 30 days, okay? Let's just suppose for a moment that we get the peace, and it looks like we will get the peace. Let's go ahead a month from now. Once we have the peace, how do we maintain it, particularly in a region where there is so much volatility?
You're going to keep the special forces there because that's one of the things they do very well. And we're going to have to create an infrastructure of police and judicial systems. We're also probably bring in some Iraqi citizens from the United States. These people lived here for a long time, and bring them over to help. They've seen this country, they've seen what freedom is, and we use them, get language skills, a lot of them. We're going to need NGOs, not non-governmental organizations, the UNHCR, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, because they're fabulous at bringing in supplies. And we want to get the military as quickly as possible away. We want to create an atmosphere in which we're helping them without guns. So that keeping the peace will be as hard, if not harder, than this fight. It's because it's so delicate.
What about the reaction in the Arab world? What about Syria and Iran? That's a big question.
Yeah, Syria. I think it's Hamas, which Syria and Hezbollah in Iran, and that's state-sponsored terrorism. We've got to get them to stop it. We don't have to invade them, but they got to know it's going to end. We're here in the Middle East, and that they've got to stop providing terrorism.
You know,
supporting terrorism.
Experts say that the only thing the Arab world understands is power and strength.
Absolutely.
And what we have shown in the last 2.5, 3 weeks is power and strength. That, you know, if you're going to cause terror, if you're going to disrupt the world, we're going to get you.
But this is brute force terror, about power. There are other parts of power like controlling their banks, influencing their economy. There are other ways of getting at control without having to invade them. This is but we can have the hammer. It's just sitting outside their country. That we got to use this to influence these countries to stop state-sponsored terrorism.
You talked about the importance of bringing Americans or Iraqis who might be living in America now who've become American citizens, taking them back over there. We heard Brian Wilson and Mark Ginsburg mention Ahmed Chalabi. He is one of the many leaders of one of the many opposition forces who is a Chicago businessman. How significant is it that he has been brought in at this time to Iraq?
It's very significant because, first of all, he's brought in by American military aircraft, and that shows we're supporting this guy. He's very controversial. He's worked in our intelligence community. He's been very good in places, but there are other parts, like the parts of State Department and parts of CIA, who don't like this guy. So it shows that we've decided he's our guy. We brought him in, and he's going to help the transition. Chalabi's very influential. He'll be a power broker and the behind-the-scene guy. He does not want to be president. He's important, and it's important for him that we brought him in militarily.
Why wouldn't he want to be president?
Chalabi, his personality is he wants to influence the president. He wants to be a kingmaker, not the king. And there's money involved. There's a lot of things, but he's been around many, many years to try to get what's happening now. He doesn't want to interfere with it. But it's a big deal that he's on the ground with, by the way, Iraqi National Congress soldiers with weapons. So we brought in the beginnings of this police force that we've talked about.
Speaking of terrorists, and when we're talking about Syria and Iran and Hezbollah, other terrorist groups, Osama bin Laden, we heard from him today. We don't know when this tape was made, but a tape was made in which he made another call to jihad. He named the various governments that he wants to bring down. It's nothing new, but to me, it's just another demonstration of what we know now that are the links between Al-Qaeda and Saddam. What did you make of this tape today?
Well, I made out the pain in the butt that he showed up again. Here we are doing this great stuff in Iraq. It reminds everybody that terrorism is not going to go away, that UBL is still around. It did a great job in Afghanistan, but it's a symbol. And you don't like symbols in terrorism, and it reminds us that we've got to get Hussein. We don't want to create another symbol, and that the battle against terrorism we're a long way from finishing it. UBL is probably not directly advising Al-Qaeda, running it, but his influence is everywhere, and he's a symbol. We want to get him out of that symbol. And it's interesting that he would come out with this now. You know, he wants to get a little publicity. It's a pain in the butt to have him come out with that, because we want to concentrate in Iraq and get this done. We don't want to be reminded this guy's still around.
Well, speaking of someone who may still be around, that is Saddam Hussein. We don't know at this hour whether he's dead or alive. There's no proof proving that he is alive. If he's not in Baghdad, where would he be? What about the chances of him going to his hometown of Tikrit?
More than likely Syria, than Tikrit, because he knows we're going after Kirk. They're going after his hometown. They're outside it now. But there's such a labyrinth underneath that city. He's 30 years in living there and surviving. I truly believe that guy's still around in Baghdad, and we've got him walled in. But there's always that outside chance, and you have to consider it, that he could be where you're suggesting, or it could actually be in Syria. But I'm betting that he's in Baghdad, and we got him.
But if he is in this labyrinthine part of tunnels, it could be really hard to find him.
Yep, you bet.
Okay. All right, Colonel Hunt, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you a little later. But now let's go back to Brian in Washington.
All right, thank you much. We want to check in with Rick Leventhal, one of our embedded reporters. You may have noticed he's changed groups that he's with. He's still with the Marines. It was the 1st Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines. And earlier today, he was walking with these Marines, about 100 of them, through the streets of East Baghdad. Their goal, an insane goal, to draw fire. He's with us now on the video phone. Rick, what's the latest?
Brian, some low-tech dismantling of some anti-aircraft weaponry behind me. You may be able to see, we are on a video phone, so it's going to be a little jerky, but you may be able to see some Marines with the 223. They've got sledgehammers. They've been pounding away at this anti-aircraft weapon to try and dismantle it. They may actually blow it up later, but right now they just want to make sure it can't be used against coalition forces. There are at least half a dozen of these anti-aircraft weapons in this one area that we're standing in right now in East Baghdad. We're east of the heart of the city. There are, I don't know, more than 100, a couple hundred Marines out here fanned out across the area. They're doing an urban patrol. They're trying to draw fire. They're looking for the enemy. They want the enemy to engage so that they can find where the enemy is and kill them. We have heard sporadic gunfire out here. I'm being told now that most or all of that gunfire is from the Marines shooting at men that they're seeing running house to house to try and avoid detection. They are patrolling these streets. They're looking for trouble, and I guess in some cases they're finding it. I want to bring in Corporal Jason McCall. He is a reservist, as is almost your entire battalion out here, reservists, the only Marine infantry reservists in the war. You told me you work for an armored truck company when you're not...
Yes, Armored Transport in Oakland.
Must be a pretty big difference for you to be out here in Iraq.
Oh, definitely. I'd only been working at Armored for like 6 months. I just gotten off active duty in 2000.
Yeah. Well, describe this experience. How's it been so far?
It's been interesting. It's different. You know, it took a while to get into the action, but now that we found it and we know where it's at, we're just going to work with it.
Did you ever say to yourself, what the heck am I doing out here, when they start shooting at you?
I mean, I know why we're here. I know what we're doing. And for me, from active duty, every day for 4 years, I assumed I was going to go. I just never knew I'd come to the reserves and end up being here. I always thought I'd be on active duty.
Is that a good thing, though? Are you happy that you're finally seeing some combat?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's why I joined. I mean, I didn't join to be in an office and you know.
This thing has gotten rather ugly with not organized armies that you're facing, but you know, guerrilla tactics, exactly. Must be harder for you guys to fight this war.
Well, it is, because we're going into their backyard and into their towns, and they know where to go, and we're trying to find them. I mean, they know all the little nooks and crannies and where to hide and the little mouse holes they can shoot from in the windows and the shadows.
Is this a war that you are confident you can win now and win quickly?
No, definitely. Without a doubt in my mind.
Well, that's good news for all of us. The hunt for fighters continues out here. Brian?
Rick, talk to me about how far you have been hiking today, because you called in about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago, and you were marching through the neighborhoods of East Baghdad then. How far are you from your base of operation?
I'd say we traveled, what, a couple clicks, you think? Yeah, about 2 kilometers. The beginning of it was the roughest because at some point someone yelled double time and we started running down the street, and we're wearing these very heavy bulletproof vests and carrying some gear, and it was very, very early in the morning. And we also had artillery firing. The Marines were firing artillery from behind us over our heads, hitting targets ahead of us. Since then, we have had some time to catch our breath, and right now we're in this sort of construction area. And again, the activity here has been limited mostly to dismantling some anti-aircraft weapons, and also there is some door-to-door activity going on in some of these abandoned buildings. And as I mentioned, there is some shooting going on. But this kind of activity will continue.
That's important when you find a piece of equipment like the one we see behind you, to take it out so that it can't be used against you at a later time.
Exactly, and it's one of the things that the 3rd LAR was doing, the Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion was doing when we were embedded with them. They were coming across all sorts of anti-aircraft weaponry, armored personnel carriers, tanks. One day, one of the companies disabled 18 of the armored personnel carriers. They were not occupied at the time, but they were destroyed. As you mentioned, it's very important to destroy the tanks and also the munitions that they're finding. These guys have found large caches of munitions in their searches. And they are destroying that stuff so that when the Iraqis or whoever's trying to use it comes back to get it, it's not there anymore. The more stuff they get rid of, the less stuff that can be used against them. And that's a primary goal of the 223.
Rick, I want you to, if you can, have your cameraman pan around and let us see the kinds of areas in which you're operating.
Okay, I wanted to, I guess we can do that. I didn't lose a connection there. Okay, this is, you can see some of the you may be able to see some of the anti-aircraft weapons behind me. It's sort of an empty area. It's a construction site, if you will. There are several of these anti-aircraft guns on wheels parked in the middle of this sort of field-like area. We passed through a very urban environment to get here, and in fact, some of the homes that we saw were very nice homes behind walls. They looked like they were well constructed. There were a lot of people in many of these houses who were watching us go by. A lot of them were waving at us. We also passed through some more urban environments that were perhaps not as nice, with apartments and that sort of thing. This area looks like it is intended to be a pretty nice development. These are large homes that are being built here, but apparently they're being used in some cases by soldiers and Ba'ath Party loyalists and Fedayeen. They're hiding out here and perhaps using some of these as perches for snipers.
And that's been a concern, that the military or the Fedayeen would take over individual homes and hide there and look like regular residents, and you not know it.
Yeah, and Corporal, are you seeing a lot of that, where the opposition is using private homes to protect their actions, the snipers?
I believe so. When they see us coming down the streets, I'm sure they hide in one house, and once we bypass that house, they'll go to the next one, and then once we've already passed that, they'll go back, because they know it's already been cleared.
We saw a lot of uniforms in the street, Brian, and the colonel this morning or last night told me that, in fact, that is their intel, that these guys are taking off their uniforms and leaving them in the street or wherever, but they're not dropping their guns, and they are shooting at them. So the best the Marines can do is look for people with weapons. If people don't have weapons, they're not going to shoot at them, obviously, but if they do, they will. And the best indication that someone is an enemy at this point, since they're not wearing uniforms, is if they have a weapon.
Rick, tell me what you must be going through your mind right now when you think about the task that you have at hand. The task is basically walk down the street and see if you can get people to shoot at you. That's kind of insane, Rick.
Yeah, it does sound insane. And when we first switched units, our impression was that we would probably be in an armored personnel carrier of some kind, possibly even a tank of some kind. And of course, here we are walking down the street, completely defenseless. It's a little unsettling. And there's no two ways around it. Christian and I, our photographer Christian Galdabini, who I know you know well because he works out of the D.C. Bureau, just looked at me and shook his head like, what are we doing here? This is crazy. But it's part of the job, and we are with some, I hope, good shots. Yeah.
I'm low marksman.
Low marksman, great. But some of these guys, at least some of them are good marksmen, so we hope that if trouble comes, and it has been coming, that we'll be well protected.
One of the things you talked about earlier, Rick, was the fact that many of the people you're with are reservists. That is not uncommon, I'm told. There are other reserve units that are doing this kind of work. But what is the mood of these people? I mean, one day they're working at Sears, they're working for armored personnel companies or armored truck companies, and the next day they're on a plane headed to the deserts of Kuwait and moved on into Iraq.
Brian wants to know the mood, like you go from your day job. What is your day job?
I'm a registered nurse back home in Alabama.
Okay. And your full name?
Ray Dunn.
And your rank?
I'm an HM2, a corpsman for the Marines.
You're a corpsman. And you're a registered nurse, normally helping people back home in Alabama. Now here you are potentially helping fellow Marines. How does that feel for you?
It's a job that we prepare for in the reserves. It's something that we, look forward to doing out here, helping some of the townspeople when we have a chance to, and definitely we're looking to not have any casualties on our side.
But there have been some. I know that there were 9 in with Fox Company.
Correct.
Yesterday. That brings it all home, I would imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. When we have casualties with some of the fellow companies, a lot of these guys know them, and it hits a little closer to home. But we've been very fortunate, very blessed to be protected from that and go down the right streets, I guess.
Have you personally had to administer first aid yet?
Just a couple of guys. We had one of the guys earlier that had some first aid that needed to be done, but nothing serious. Everything's a little minor bumps and bruises, ankle sprains, typical things that we get when we go on any evolution.
Are you gung-ho?
We're ready to go. There's no doubt. We're definitely in a war battlefield, and we have to keep our eyes open and our ears open, and have the sixth sense working for us, and we're ready.
I've heard of some Marines, I'm not saying you're one of them, who join up, hope never to see action. They hope to just do their time and get out. Do you feel like you're surrounded by those kinds of Marines, or you got the guys who are just couldn't wait to get here?
There's a small percentage of the population of any branch of the service that mainly goes for the education. These guys here, there's a lot of Marines that have spent a lot of time on the reserve side. Most have done active duty time as well as myself. I've got 15 years in. If I was here just for the education or just for spending time and getting a little extra money, then I would have been out by now.
All right, Corpsman, thanks so much for joining us. Brian, you have a question or you got to run?
Actually, I think we just missed our opportunity to run, so I'm going to hand it over to Lori Dew. She's dying to get in here and ask you some questions. Rick, again, some tremendous work on your part.
All right.
And be very careful. Keep your head down. Lori, take over for a little while.
All right, I sure will. Rick, thanks for sticking around with us. We appreciate it. Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. We're going to get to some comments about your helmet in just a second, but first let me ask you this.
Yeah, it's stylish.
Oh,
isn't
it is really styling. Yeah,
yeah.
Colonel Hunt and I are agreeing that you might need a new size or something. But But anyway,
that's pretty low. I'm all the way over here, just sweating and, you know, living in dirt, and you guys are making fun of my helmet. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
I am ashamed of myself, and so is Colonel Hunt.
No, I'm not ashamed of myself at all.
Or he says he's not.
He's a star. You look at him, he's a star. You got a helmet that doesn't fit, you got a wrong color.
It's better than the floppy hat if I get...
No, the floppy hat was you.
It's better than a floppy hat,
Floppy hat was you.
You know...
Yeah, well, I'll put it back on.
Rick, all kidding aside, you know, God, buddy, you're really doing something pretty dangerous right now. But what you and the guys are doing there is also historic, and I would assume that it's not lost on them that for the first time in recent history, you're seeing the first Marine reservists there in infantry.
Yeah, well, you guys feel like you're making history out here since you are reservists, and I mean, I know there were reservists in Gulf War I, but you're the only reservist, the only infantry reservist out here. How does that sit with you?
It was pretty good. I was told before I joined this unit that it was a good unit. By one of the fellow Marines, he said it was a good unit, and that well, I didn't expect to come here at that time, but it's good. I feel secure with them and safe.
To put that in perspective, I was told there were 9 Marine infantry battalions, and yours is the only one that's been activated for this duty.
On the reserve side?
Yeah.
I believe so. Is that correct, son?
And you guys have been active for 16 months now, approximately, right?
Well, we did a year Homeland Defense back in the States at Camp Pendleton and Camp Horno, and it said we'd be there for a year with a possible 12-month extension. And after that year that we were in Horno, this came up.
It's amazing to me because a lot of reservists never do serve more than a weekend a month or 2 weekends a month that they do, and here you are 16 months into it, and now, I mean, you're at war and you're still going strong.
Definitely. Like I said, the morale's good, and a lot of them wanted to be here. So they've had a whole year to get ready for it. We've been doing all sorts of training, so they feel pretty secure and pretty...
And now they're right up front, Lori. They're right up front.
And what's... I know this is such a trite question, but how are they doing? They do look... Rick?
How are you doing?
Yeah,
Johnson?
I mean,
I'm doing good.
Are they fired up?
Say hi to Lori Do.
Yes, I do. Hey, Lori.
Here we go.
How you doing? Spent a lot of time watching you, and you have a very pretty smile.
You got some fans out here, Lori. You know, her office is right next door to mine.
You're a lucky guy.
Yes, I am.
Well,
are you enjoying your time at war?
No.
No?
No. I'd rather be at home.
What would you be doing if you were at home?
I go to school at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo.
What are you studying?
Political science.
Did you suspect that this might happen? Did you have any say in the matter?
No, not at all.
So you're anxious to get back?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back to school, and I'm sure in hindsight this will be a positive experience, but right now just looking for a shower and a hot rack.
Yeah, you're not enjoying this at all?
No.
All right. Well, you want to pass a message along to Lori before I let you go?
Phone number. Yeah. Phone number, please.
All right. There you go. Well, by the way, what was that we just heard? Was that artillery, do you think? Yeah. Some artillery. We've been hearing that throughout the day, but haven't heard any gunfire in a while, and that's probably a good thing.
I would say that's very definitely a good thing, Rick Leventhal. Jeez, right. Good grief. Hard to believe that these guys are just, you know, regular old American teenagers or guys in their early 20s who work at Sears or go to Cal Poly and they just have, you know, regular old lives. But, Rick, thank you as always for taking the time to give us some more.
There are actually, how many?
Go ahead.
I heard there was, I think, 17 police officers from the LAPD, at least 17. Some from Vegas. Are you Beverly Hills? No, come here. Are you really?
Yeah, he is.
Hey, come here. This guy's a police officer in Beverly Hills.
Well, he's a long way from Beverly Hills,
isn't he?
Can you give us
your full name and rank?
It's Major Tom West.
Major Tom West, you're a long way from Beverly Hills, says Lori Do.
Yes, I am.
You get people shooting at you in Beverly Hills? I'm guessing not.
Not yet. Hasn't happened.
Yeah, but what about here?
It's been happening a lot, I guess, but there's nothing real serious, nothing you really do about it except...
What did the guys in the department back in Beverly Hills say when you said, hey, I guess what, I'm going off to Iraq?
Pretty much sucks for you? No. No, I got a lot of support from the department. It was really great. The chief took care of me, and
Meaning your salary?
Absolutely, yeah.
Hey, Rick?
They went overboard, rolled out the red carpet. And
yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Rick, I've got a quick question for the guy you're talking to there. Does he have family? And if so, what was his family's reaction when he went over there? Maybe he got the support of the police chief, but what about his family?
What about your family? You getting support from them? Or what was their reaction?
I have a daughter. She was stressed out, but...
How old is she?
She's going to be 9 soon.
Yeah.
In July, actually. But they're doing great. My parents, my family's doing really good, so...
Have you talked to them at all?
No. I got a letter dated the 15th of March a couple of days ago, so the mail's been slow. But I've been on deployment before, so they understand. And hopefully this thing will be over soon, so...
Yeah, and then you go back to being a cop in Beverly Hills?
Yep.
Now listen, if I come speeding through Beverly Hills, you gonna remember me? And
stand by.
Oh, wow.
Come on now. Yeah, you're gonna give me a get out of jail free card?
We'll see.
I'm trying to collect them, by the way. Huh?
It depends how things are going at the coffee bean.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for helping protect us out here. No problem. All right. You're a good shot?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm going to stay next to this guy.
Yeah, I want you to stand next to the good marksman out there, Rick. I mean, for Pete's sakes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm joking, but, you know, it is a little unsettling, especially when we're walking down the street and we hear gunfire and we don't know where it's coming from.
No. Rick, I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go for now. We're coming up against a hard break here, but Rick Leventhal, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you later. Let's go back to you, Brian, in Washington.
Yeah, Rick, if you're there real quick, you say you're getting, in some quarters, a pretty nice reception from the locals?
Yeah, we have been. Everybody waves at us, and not everybody, but most people are waving, and a lot of people are smiling, you know, thumbs up, and some people actually speak English and say hello. But, you know, the colonel is telling these guys to be careful because the guys who are waving during the daytime could be shooting at night. And I think everybody out here understands that, and it's part of the job.
All right, Rick Leventhal on the front, walking through the east side of Baghdad, where they are destroying in the background some anti-aircraft weapons. Ambassador Ginsburg is here with me, and I want to ask you a couple questions. I asked that last question of Rick because, you know, it was very important to the Bush administration going in that not only did they go in and remove Saddam Hussein, but they try to win the hearts and minds of the people of Iraq. And how do you think that effort is going thus far? I would say mixed results.
Well, mixed results going in, Brian, because first of all, most of the Iraqis that we want to liberate remember that in 1991 we were not by their side when we encouraged them to rebel, and many of them were massacred because we didn't come to their rescue. So they're hesitant about whether or not we're going to stay long enough for them to get rid of the Ba'ath regime. And secondly, until they see Saddam's head on a stick, since he has been the symbol of the tyranny that has been inflicted on them, they're not going to be satisfied that things are going to go that well until they see him gone.
You know, we can go halfway around the world and put people on a video phone, but we forget to put your microphone on. I apologize for that. We're going to, where are we going, folks? Okay. We'll read this. U.S. forces continue battling Iraq soldiers in downtown Baghdad. Marines report fighting off snipers as the coalition continues to gain control of Iraq's capital city. Hello, everyone. It's 11 a.m. in Baghdad. It's 3 a.m. here on America's East Coast. I am Brian Wilson in Washington.
Hi, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Dew in New York, and you are watching Fox News Channel's continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. You know, there has been so much going on, and just to give you a little more information than what Brian just told you a moment ago, we continue to hear from our coalition forces via Rick Leventhal, who's with the Marines, and Greg Kelly, who's with the Army, that the grip is tightening around Baghdad. The Pentagon is now claiming that the U.S. and British forces have sole ownership of all Iraqi airspace, including over the capitals. We've got the airspace in Tikrit, which is Saddam's hometown. And just 24 hours ago, as you will probably all remember, we heard about 8,000 pounds of ordnance that came in on this restaurant and whatever else was there with it. We were reporting that we thought it might be Saddam Hussein and his sons and some of the top leadership. We still do not have it confirmed who was inside that area when it was bombed, but the bottom line is whoever was there is not with us anymore. All right, Brian, I'm being told that we're going to go back to you in Washington now.
Yeah, just a couple of things are crossing the wire here that I think we've been meaning to get in the last few minutes, but we wanted to stay with Rick Leventhal as long as we could. First of all, remember that while we have an operation going on in Iraq, there is still a military operation going on in another theater, that being Afghanistan. And there is a bulletin that has crossed our wire here tonight saying that according to the U.S. military, this is confirmed by the U.S. military, 11 Afghan civilians have been killed by a U.S.-led coalition bombing. The details of that are a bit sketchy, but apparently it has to do with a bomb dropped by coalition aircraft landing on a house on the outskirts of Shkin near the Pakistan border. Other details are coming with that. There are still 11,500 U.S. and allied troops in Afghanistan. You know what they're doing. They're looking for Osama bin Laden still, and that operation continues to go on. But apparently something of a tragedy tonight. 11 civilians, Afghan civilians, have been killed in Afghanistan. There is another note of interest here that has to do with what's going on in northern Iraq. Unfortunately, we just don't have the cameras in northern Iraq that we have in Baghdad right now, and it tends to get short shrift, but there's a lot going on there. U.S. Special Operations troops, according to the AP, and Kurdish fighters seized a strategic hilltop near the major Baghdad-held city of Mosul in northern Iraq early Wednesday, a senior Kurdish leader said. The area is called Maklub. Does that sound familiar to you? I have with me Ambassador Mark Ginsburg. What do you know about that area?
Well, that area is just on the shelf of the mountains that are coming down towards the oil fields near Kirkuk and Mosul. And so what this is indicating is that our special forces, as well as whatever forces we have on the northern front, are beginning slowly to make their way to the perimeters of these cities.
And we really need to have a better presence in the north right now, don't we?
Well, indeed, and where the cities that are not liberated are at this point in time are the two major cities, Kirkuk and Mosul, Kirkuk being the center of the Iraqi oil installations in the north, and Mosul being the major city that separates Baghdad from Tikrit, and that's the road that we want to get down in order to get to Tikrit, which is Saddam's home city.
Ambassador Ginsburg, thank you. Let's go back to Lori Dew. I think she's got Greg Kelly ready to go right there at the presidential palace in downtown Baghdad. Lori?
Said it. There are a couple of palaces that coalition forces have taken over, including a newer one, and that's where Greg Kelly has been reporting for us for the last several hours, and he's right in front there. It's really quite extraordinary that he's just standing there on the front porch, so to speak, of one of the palaces there. Greg, we know that earlier some bombs were still falling. What are you hearing at this hour?
Hi, Lori. Sure, bombs are still falling, and there's still fighting going on sporadically throughout the city. But it has lessened somewhat overall than it was about 12 hours ago, where it was fairly constant since our arrival. But for now, they're dealing with these pockets of resistance. The latest was a fairly substantial counterattack this morning. About 50 to 100 of these Special Republican Guards attempted to come over to this side of the city from the east side on boats across the Tigris River. Their movement was detected, and they were taken out by 2nd Brigade Combat Team tanks. For now, the situation seems fairly stable, despite the occasional rumbling we hear in the distance. 2nd Brigade Combat Team has important military assets like M1 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles parked in front of an array of Iraqi governmental buildings like the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of the Interior, as well as this palace, another palace just down the Qadisiyah Expressway, and also the parade grounds and other kind of symbolic points of interest in this town. As far as the 2nd Brigade Combat Team goes, they feel like they have accomplished a good part of their mission just by being here. It was their hope that the presence of M1 tanks and Bradleys rumbling through the town would kind of shock the Iraqi regime, whatever's left of it, into collapse. And they're still waiting for that to happen. For now, a couple of questions remain. Number one, what is Saddam Hussein's status? Commanders here really want some intelligence on that issue. We understand it may take a couple of days to verify, but they certainly want that thing put to bed. Also, they'd like to know where the Iraqi information minister is to show him once and for all that U.S. troops are, in fact, in Baghdad. Lori?
You know, speaking of that massive mound of rubble that is left there in that neighborhood called Mansour, we know that special ops are on the ground, perhaps. They're sifting through the rubble. But if you would, give us a sense of how far you are from that neighborhood.
The location that was hit is roughly 3 miles from where we're standing. And before the coalition airstrike happened, the one that apparently might have taken out Saddam Hussein, we knew it was coming. The Air Force officer came out of his vehicle and said, get ready, in 30 seconds, bombs are going to fall and they're going to be loud. And sure enough, in just under 30 seconds, we heard a massive blast. It was about 3 miles away, and that is the site that was hit. We haven't spent really any time in that area. Our efforts have been, the 2nd Brigade combat team's efforts have been focused mainly in the downtown area, those governmental points of interest, kind of like the Washington Mall, if you will. That's the kind of area we're in and that we're operating from right now. Lori?
Another Washington parallel is the fact that this palace is essentially the equivalent of the White House. That was how you actually put it earlier, and that some of the guys who went in there were sort of looking around just with their eyes peeled, couldn't believe, you know, just the opulence in there. If you would give us a sense of what the first reaction was when the guys went in there after, of course, securing the areas that might have been booby-trapped. What did they see? What was their reaction?
There was a lot of euphoria that they were actually walking around in this palace. I should point out that, you know, Saddam Hussein has roughly 11 palaces throughout the country. This is one of the main ones, but they were in awe just to be there, just to actually be walking in the corridors and in the bedrooms and in the bathrooms of Saddam Hussein. It was just a surreal experience. And once that kind of wore off, they kind of are treating it as a shelter, as a place where they can sleep, as a place where they can communicate from, relax from time to time, and possibly from time to time also pick up a couple of souvenirs. That is happening.
What are they picking up?
Nothing of any value,
Yeah.
and really there is nothing that you'd want to take home if this stuff were in a garage sale maybe, but there's some, you know, like the high